great. Murali and I will go through these. We've not had a chance to go through these ourselves, so we're double teaming. This is going to be like almost like our premiere. So let's go through this. So we have piloted with Heidi. We are in a development relationship with them around their ambient voice, and as part of that we have an AI roadmap, and as part of our agreement with them, we continue to develop additional enhancements to their product and developments. What we started with was ambient, so we went out earlier this year, it was the beginning of the year, to have a look at partnering specifically with ambient voice providers who would be able to work with us with a long-term aim of achieving some of the other items that we had in our roadmap and we knew we wanted to work on. We decided to partner with Heidi. They were one of only 2 vendors at that time in the market that could offer us what we wanted, looking at our long-term vision. And actually, in terms of personal working relationship with them, we felt that they would be much more accommodating to what we needed. So I won't read through this slide in terms of what AVT is. We piloted this between March and June this year, and we were very open at the beginning and said that we would publish the findings of our case study. We are just working through the findings and verifying the details at the moment, but that will be published and will be available publicly. We decided to pilot AVT in same-day emergency care. Rheumatology outpatients are with our rheumatology secretaries. Each department had super users to lead and support adoption. Templates were customized to each specialty. Training was delivered on-site and virtually. We did have the Heidi team come in and shadow those areas as well. And ongoing engagement meant that we looked at the optimizations. When we look at the quick refinement and smooth integration, that's the optimization of the product. Murali, I don't know if you want to add a bit more here around how that worked specifically in SDEC, because they were the first area to go live.
Yeah, I think just from a clinical perspective, there were different tools out there, but everyone had like a nice linear workflow, and it would work with nice, say an outpatient setting where a patient would come in, they'd have a consultation and they would leave, and it would be quite straightforward. Whereas SDEC was a very fragmented workflow for clinicians that people would come, go, have tests come back at various different times, and you had to talk to patients a second or a third time. So it was a very disruptive environment, and we really wanted to test it to see how it would work and how the notes would generate after every encounter. And so it was a great training place to kind of test the technology out. So SDEC was a prime place for us to test it out. But we knew it would, if it worked in SDEC, it would pretty much work in most other places.
Yeah, so we took on our most challenging areas first. We like to do that at Dudley. Bear with me. There we go. This is why we chose to pilot it. So we had a massive backlog of letters, which originally was not our use case for this, but we found that we were actually able to upload transcriptions from Big Hand into the AVT. We thought we'd give it a go, and it worked. So we had a massive issue of a rheumatology backlog, 2,700 letters, 6 months delays, high clinical risk. It was on our corporate risk register. We obviously had patients who were sitting on the waiting list, who needed their letters urgently, who weren't getting that, who were deteriorating whilst they were waiting. Efficiency pressures, we all know what that looks like, and we were having a look at whether or not we were at that point earlier in the year exploring how tech could help us with productivity. There's a human impact to this in terms of our clinicians staying late, clinics overrunning, risk of burnout, retention is really key for us. Finance, we had rising bank and agency spend in a constrained budget. So to give you a bit of context, we are a deficit trust and a deficit ICB. So that was a real driver for us as well. We undertook the pilot because we wanted to understand whether the proof of concept would work. And as I said at the beginning, we are on a development pathway with Heidi, so we are developing additional functionality. So we wanted to do the proof of concept for that additional functionality as well. There was a strategic context in terms of do more with the same or less, which was the ask of us. And in 2025, so this year, we were coming to the end of our 3-year digital plan that had run from 22 to 25. So what we were doing at the beginning of this year to set us up for a really good end of the year is we've been looking at our portfolio and planning for the next 3 years. And we knew that ambient AI featured really heavily in our next 3-year plan. So we plan in 3-year cycles at Dudley for digital data and tech. And so we decided that actually it was a good time for us to be trying this ahead of publishing our new 3-year digital data and tech plan, and safety. These were some of the benchmarks that we looked at when we were trying to define what the benefits were going to be, and that we were hoping to see through the pilot. These were the results from SDEC. So in terms of if we were to take the pilot and we were to extrapolate that across the whole of SDEC, and we were to assume the same level of uptake that we had as we saw in the pilot in terms of adoption, we calculated that actually based on a 40-hour week, what we would be releasing is around 2,652 clinical hours per year in SDEC alone. And so this is what we've been benchmarking. So documentation time, you can see we had 71% reduction per patient. Staff surveys show less fatigue and improved job satisfaction, and you'll see some of the comments towards the end of this presentation. We've talked about the additional clinical capacity that's being released, but you have to bear in mind that that is taken from what that clinical capacity was at the beginning, so the baseline that we did, and actually what we're working through now is we're taking out what our clinicians were already doing in terms of their own overtime. So what they were using in terms of administrative time, etc., which isn't usually captured in your working hours. And we found that notes were more complete and consistent than manual typing. Again, Murali, I don't know if you want to talk about the actual experience in SDEC, like from a clinical point of view.
I mean, no doubt that this was technology which the juniors picked up quite quickly, and they ran with it very, very easily. And I think the biggest note that what they noticed was, even though at that time we hadn't had any integration, we were using it as separate tools, but moving it into our EPR, they found that the documentation was way faster and way more accurate. And one of the important things is most of them stayed over when they finished to kind of finish off a lot of that documentation, which happens in lots of outpatient settings as well, where here they just finished on time and they were able to go home on time. I appreciate we had to describe some of the time changes that did happen, but I wanted to be mindful from a clinical perspective that even though we saved a lot of time, I think this time is actually some of the time we saved is from the goodwill from staff who stayed late generally in most services. And also, it's not about trying to say we're going to be able to see more patients. It's about kind of providing a better quality of care in the emergency sphere. So I think that's what we wanted to come across, that we will release time to be able to kind of better care for our patients and have better well-being for staff.
Thanks, Murali. And then this is what that looks like in terms of where we were. So 4 to 6 minutes saved per consultation. So clinics run scheduled even when they were overbooked. That's really important. Throughput increased by 40 to 50% on discharge letters. So actually made the administrative work a lot faster. 90% of patients, or actually more than 90% of patients in the pilot surveys reported they felt more listened to, citing less screen time, better eye contact, just a better relationship with their clinician overall throughout that consultation. And we've seen a reduction in follow-up queries and improved continuity of care because of the quality of the output. We also tried it in rheumatology outpatients. So we had a massive clinical risk, which I talked to you about before, which was on our corporate risk register, which was cited at 20, just due to the volume of backlog of letters that we had waiting. In this 3-month pilot, we actually managed to reduce the backlog from 2,700 to less than 200 letters. And this is uploading every single audio transcription manually from Big Hand, because we use Big Hand at Dudley Group, into the AVT solution and having it transcribe the letter. Turnaround time dropped from 6 months to 8 days. We avoided £4,000 every month on bank spend. So just to what we were trying to do, just trying to clear that backlog, and improved GP communication and audit compliance again because of the quality. But I will stress that this was not the main use case of this. This was just something that we tried on a whim, because we thought, why not? In terms of secretarial coding, so secretarial efficiency, so we saw 66% productivity gain in terms of generating the letters by taking the transcription and putting it into the AVT. So we were able to do more with less staff. Coding accuracy and income, complete comorbidity capture, so structured records mapped directly into ICD-10 and OPCS to provide more accurate tariff income for the trust. You can see the financial impact there in terms of the bank staff and overtime costs that were avoided during this pilot. And we're now looking at the coding development with the AVT, which is real big impact on us just because it takes us around 3 to 5 years to train coders accurately. And actually, we have an issue with that, not in terms of retention because we have them available right now, but in terms of our future workforce pipeline for coders. And this is some of the staff feedback. So and this kind of speaks for itself. Like you can see what people are saying. And I said, I think it's really heartbreaking that actually some of the feedback I had was I get to leave on time. I actually get to go home on time. And I said, for me, that I think that's particularly heartbreaking because that should just be a given. Like I can't believe that we have all of this capacity and we have all these digital tools. And yet actually our workforce just doesn't seem to appear to be able to get the benefits from that. Murali, I don't know if you want to talk about that because, you guys saw like the full effects of this.
I think from a staff feedback, we're all humans, and when we work long hours, particularly in SDEC, we have 10-hour and 12-hour shifts. The quality of documentation as day goes by slowly dwindles. It's not optimal. Whereas with Heidi, we were able to continue to capture a lot of accurate information, and it made it easy for the clinicians. So they had less. I think that a lot of juniors described as they were less fatigued by the end of the day, and in being able to use this tool, they were kept on top of things. So it was a remarkable tool from that perspective. I think just going to highlight from the context of how we deploy this in rheumatology, which Ravi alluded to. I think the idea was to just use it real time in clinics. And that was a primary perspective, but we did have a backlog, which we did apply the tool to. It did had its own some issues with it, but I think we did overcome a lot of that over time. But the primary intention was to use it as a ambient voice dictation and not to use it as to clear the backlog.
Thanks, Murali. And I'll just add that we also had a clinician who suffers from dyslexia. And actually this really helped in terms of the improvement, the anxiety around being able to capture everything within the notes. But you can see that actually you can't, I sometimes don't feel like we benchmark this enough, like we're not mature enough in our benefits realization to be looking at things that don't offer a financial and productivity saving and relay that back. But there are massive safety gains to be made here, as Murali said, especially as you look at some of the content of what's being captured throughout this consultation, especially as the day goes on. But also when you're transferring that care over to somebody else and you're seeing the content of what's being written, and in terms of explaining that to patients as well, they sometimes just don't understand the information that's being relayed to them. And actually this has really helped with that. This is patient impact. So in SDEC, outpatients, over 90% of patients reported about more listened to. Clinicians often read back highly generated summaries, which patients have been describing as being clear and easier to follow. Letters, as we talked about in terms of timeliness and faster GP communication, so delays in follow-up and medication decisions, but also the quicker turnaround times is just helping with that improved communication and how that patient feels and the care that they receive, and it just feeling much more joined up and a lot faster. This gives an overview of summary of some of our benefits there in terms of where we're sitting. And as I said, we'll be publishing this as a full case study, which will be available. And this is just a nice pretty slide, which makes it look really good, but essentially just the same benefits, but just shown in a different way. And again, shows some of the benchmarking that we've done on our benefits realization. And then these are our next steps. So we're going to look to sustain and embed AVT in current areas. We are looking to expand into high volume outpatient areas as well. So TNO is particularly one that comes into mind, where we have huge variability as well across that service in terms of consultation and consultation times. So that will be interesting. We are working on the coding workflow. So I was explaining at HET that we ran a test a couple of weeks ago, which we're really excited about, where we pitted the AI against our coders, and we picked 4 particularly complex patients and took them both through the test. And the AVT, the AI beat our coders every single time. So we all got incredibly excited, because we were like, it's actually doing a much better job actually than the coders. So if we can do that with complex patients, then actually less complex patients should hopefully be a doddle for it. We're sharing our workflows nationally, so we are leading on the Midlands procurement of AVT. So we're running that steering group, and we're taking the learning that we have and pushing that into that in order to help other organisations, and we're sharing our documentation. And Deanne's running the governance group for that as well, regionally. And we are, as I said, we're on a development pathway, so we're doing further development. So we've just done a proof of concept whereby we've been able to embed the AVT into our electronic patient record, which means that our clinicians can launch it from our electronic patient records. We just did the proof of concept a few weeks ago, so that's not rolled out yet, and we're looking at how we're going to be rolling that out. But that means that in theory, we could use it for any documentation that we have within our EPR, and we're looking at making it mobile. So we're looking at pushing it into a mobile version for our community and our mobile teams.